thanks everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Nick Wagner, and I am the person behind Innovate Connecticut. And as the slide says, our mission is to promote, foster, and grow innovation in Connecticut schools, colleges, and universities. And we're doing that through knowledge sharing and best practice sharing, which is like the big thing that we've really decided to try to focus on lately. So Sharon is from she's from Connecticut. She teaches at the Southport school. And I'm gonna give you a quick bio about you, Sharon. So you are a learning disabilities teacher, director of technology at the Southport school. And I think you said earlier you've been there for 15 years.
Right.
You do a lot more than just work at the Southport school. So you also have a website and a podcast, which I'm going to let you plug both of those things because I think that's pretty cool. And you've been in the education space for quite some time. But when did you make the shift to like what is now seems to be your passion around like learning disabilities and technology and this whole space? Like, how did that shift happen?
It was kind of a weird gradual shift. Having been at the Southport school, I had actually, prior to another location I'd been at, started seeing the use of educational technology. And I love technology. I always have. I think it's my father who worked for IBM for 30 years. He ingrained in me this love. So when I was at Southport, I started to see the opportunity as technology has evolved so quickly in the last, 15 years, particularly in the education space, that it was just created an opportunity for me to take that interest of mine and the understanding of my training in special education and marry those two to impact our kids. And then it kind of grew bigger to, how could I impact not just the students in our school, but students outside of our school in similar environments or regular education environments, inclusive environments. So it's just kind of snowballed from my interest in training to kind of be this amazing passion that I get to, share with other people and learn with other people about, because it's great to see how this use of technology in today's technology, can make such a quick difference with a lot of kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll make sure when we post the recording on YouTube and we post like the recording on social media, there'll be include a link to your website so people can check that out, because I think that has like all the resources you have there, your podcast and all that good stuff. So cool. All right. So I'll let you share your screen and we'll take it away.
So I'm going to address tonight just some various tools related to note-taking and executive function. I think these are two, when we're talking about areas to talk about, I often talk about reading. That's something I'm really passionate about. I'm trained in Norton Gillingham, but I just did a webinar on that. So I was like, hey, I want to give people something different. But if you want to know more about that, I'm happy to share that webinar to you. I think I actually have the link on my website, which I'll share in a minute. So tonight I'm just going to go through some various tools that are out there and briefly address them. This will definitely not be an in-depth idea, but just to give you an essence of things that do exist in the landscape and a great resource when you're looking for further ones to use. And by no means are these the end-all be-all answers out there, but just things for consideration. Again, this is a way to contact me if you do have questions. I do not mind if people email me. So if later tonight or next week or somewhere down the road you have a question, it doesn't even need to be about note-taking and executive function. I'm always happy to connect with people. Or if you have resources to share, I'd love to hear from other people about different things that exist. I am active on Twitter, so if you are, I'd love to connect with you through Twitter. And iplant.com is my blog. There's my resources from there, a previous podcast that I did. And here's the direct link to the current podcast that I'm doing, which is kind of a micro podcast to just highlight different tools in about 2 to 3 minutes, just to give people an essence of things that exist. Started that within the last month. But so just some resources. And again, I can also lead you to other people who are amazing resources in this field. And hopefully that will include people like you. So just some considerations when we talk about incorporating technology, because there's always that conversation that it's not about the technology, but sometimes it is, depends on our learners. But I really always like to talk about that idea that we want to try to always consider that universal design for learning. We're really thinking about if we can particularly apply this in a traditional, regular classroom environment, universal design for learning is it's so great that it's come back into the conversation, and it's so impactful now. You know, with these multiple means for representation and expression is so easy to do with technology today. I think that's why that conversation has come back up. So that's always a great thing to think about when you're considering technology. We're always thinking about ease of organization and time. It is a key thing that it's in the long run. We were kind of talking briefly earlier, you know, if we can save educators time, that's so important, but also kids time as they're doing this, that sometimes it's not right off the bat that it will save time, but really when you kind of get the habit created, it will definitely be beneficial in the long run. We always want to consider those ideas of, are we differentiating or accommodating, and both are important, and just making sure when you're considering different tools to pick, what is the reasoning behind it, and just so we're clear and the students are clear, you know, is this just a momentary differentiation or something they're going to need long-term for accommodations? Always, particularly I think about note taking, but also executive function, you know, when we're picking a technology tool, thinking about the task, what is being required of them, and does the tool meet the task as well? And most importantly, with anything that we do, when we know we need to meet the needs of our learners. So if the technology tool isn't working, just like any other teaching strategy, you need to let it go and find another one, because not every tool is right for every learner or for every situation. So I'm going to start with note-taking. This has actually been an interesting path for me. I've always considered note-taking tools, but I gained a science class this year, which in our school really is related to study skills. So I really had to dive into note-taking this year, which was a new thing for me to do. We have done traditionally 2-column notes in our school, but I definitely had some kids. I had probably the weakest kids. They're 8th graders. They're going to go into high school next year, and I needed to rethink note-taking. So I kind of revisited this a little bit this past year myself. One tool that I have loved for quite a while is Notability. They have an app, there's a desktop website. I just liked it because it was multisensory. Kids could write, they could type, they could record, they could draw. And there was a great organization system within Notability. I've talked with this company a lot over the years. I also like that this company is one that will take feedback from a teacher. I, again, have personally had conversations with them, but I just like that the multisensory nature. So if kids need a drawing and a word or an image, it's really easy to do. They can have lined paper in there if they need lines for the handwriting, but it's really customizable to the learner's usage, and they can organize by subject and different notes, and they can color coordinate those. So I just find it a tool that I have really liked for a while. One tool that came across, I haven't personally used it, but that's gotten a lot of great reviews that I came across this past fall, was Wink, which is this one that you can see next to it. It talks more, again, about the visual note-taking. It was definitely something, as I explored a little bit, that was of interest. So it might be another tool to explore related to visual note-taking. And then I'll address kind of that visual piece a little bit more in a minute. And these, another great resource, and I'll address it at the end, is understood.org. They have a great tech finder area, and again, I will address it at the end too, but you know, to look for note-taking apps. So these are, again, just some examples. There are many out there depending on the device you're using, and understood.org is a great organization that has kind of curated that with the idea of those LD learners. A big one on the landscape right now is Microsoft's OneNote. One, because it's really device agnostic, but Microsoft has really done this amazing thing with trying to adapt their tools for students with dyslexia, really adults with dyslexia as well, and variety of learning needs. They have really done this robust back end across the board with all of the Microsoft Office tools, but OneNote being for those note taking. And they have these learning tools. And I know that Nick, when is that coming up that you're doing the Microsoft?
Yeah, so we're doing an open house at the Microsoft store in West Farms, the West Farms Mall in West Hartford, Connecticut, on Saturday, March 16th.
So Microsoft,
so, yeah,
it's definitely worth
they've
going
invited
to
us to come check out all their basically education focused technologies.
And it's definitely, and if you can't go then, definitely making an appointment to your local Microsoft store to learn about these tools, but they've done so much to build into it. OneNote definitely has a bit more complex organization system. I would find some kids who maybe are a little executively dysfunctioned to find that organization, the layers they built into OneNote for how you organize notes, a little much. or also for younger students, it might be a little much. I definitely think high school on up, particularly college students, would be the benefit for OneNote. But it's really interesting to explore what they have done with the various tools, particularly their immersive reader that's built in there, but just the things they also keep adding. And they're very active in sharing this on Twitter as well. So, and I think also on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in learning more about them, you can let me know. I can put you in direct contact with a person who is in charge of that team, and you can learn a little bit more. One that was a newer one to me also this fall was this audio note. It was a desktop software for Mac, which was, again, not many things I had found, but a lot of people ask about like the Live Scribe pen, which I have never really been in love with. And if you're not familiar with, the Live Scribe pen was where you had to write in a particular, it was a pen that would record audio and it would sync it to your handwritten notes. But you needed specialized paper. And for those kids who have dysgraphia or dyslexic and they can't spell well, really you're still dealing with print and handwriting, and that wasn't great. But it was, the cool feature was it did sync the audio to where students were writing notes. So again, if you have students who are better with that, it's an interesting tool to explore. But I was looking for something that did that in a more technological form. And this was one, this audio note does that. As you can kind of see it at the times on the side, sync up to where the notes are. So as students are listening to what was being said in the lecture, that it syncs up to what they had written or typed down. So again, they can type, so it takes away some of those other issues related to dysgraphia. And again, maybe some spelling because they can use word prediction. So definitely one to explore. I won't play the video here, but I will tell you where you'll be able to find this video a little bit later. So another way to organize for notes, and people don't often think about it, I actually didn't either, was thinking about using mind maps. I use mind maps in my writing class all the time to do brainstorming and organize information, but I never thought about it for note taking. And there's been a whole lot of people talking out there how they differently use these mind maps for note taking, which is really an interesting idea, because if you have a central idea, and we kind of did this in 2-column notes where you had your main idea and then you add details, well, this is a whole new visual way to explore that. So the things that traditionally exist out there, inspiration maps. I love inspiration maps on the iPad. I don't love their desktop software. I'm not even sure they're fully supporting it anymore. So if you're looking for desktop software, that's not the one to go with. But if you are on an iPad, it's great. It's multisensory, and students can, if they need to, export that out into a Google Doc or Pages in an outline format. So say they were taking notes and then they had to go write a paper on it, but they don't want to have to rewrite all the notes. They can, again, with a click of a button within Inspiration Maps, export it out to Google Docs or Pages, and then just take all those notes and just quickly edit them. Same thing with MyNote, also an iOS app. It doesn't have all the pictures, so some people like that a little better, that it's a little less distracting for some of those ADHD kids or those who get a little caught up in that, or maybe with executive function, but very similar. Poplet is one I've loved for a while. They have a website. They also have an app. They have like a free, and then to get all of the services, you have to go paid. I've really seen a lot about how people are using this in note-taking form, and Poplet has a great website for all their resources to share ideas about how people are doing that. It's very simple, which is nice. There's not a lot of bells and whistles to it, except for changing the colors of the bubbles, but you can add images, you can add text. You can't take it anywhere like you can with the others. So if it's an idea to take it and write something about it, it would have to be rewritten, but it's a very simple, clean layout. So that's one of the things I really like about it. Padlet it's kind of a non-traditional. It's a whiteboard style tool, and people post to it with these little boxes. But it's a different way to organize information. You can have a heading and then something written underneath it. They have some various different layouts to it. They, again, have a free and a paid level. Definitely worth exploring as a different way to organize information. And then I was doing a presentation a while ago, and I loved how Inspiration went out to Pages and now Google Docs. And I didn't know anything that would do that in Chrome or on a desktop. And I reached out amazingly on Twitter to the other companies that I knew existed that said, hey, you have some great mind mapping tools. Who takes it to Google? And MindMeister was quick to reply to say, hey, we do. I said, okay, I didn't know. Your directions are not clear. But MindMeister would be that solution for if you need a mind mapping tool and you need the ability for the students to take it out into a Google Doc in an outline format, MindMeister will do that. I think I've included the directions in here. And if you want this power presentation, when I'm done, you can definitely email me and I'm happy to share it to you. But they have a way for students to take that mind map out in an outline format for editing purposes. So again, I will send this to you, but just this was a quick thing they sent me and said, hey, it's pretty easy. This is all you do. And I said, this is great. So happy to share that out. And again, I think of kids who are on Chromebooks who might need that. This would be the way to do it, because MindMeister on Chromebooks is an extension and just a website. And they have a couple for free, and then it does need to go to a paid level. So as I was teaching this science class this year, one of the things was I have some students I really want to think about. They need less text and more concept. So I knew that the traditional 2-column note taking was just going to be too much for them. And we are an iPad, we're mainly iPad-based school, and we're a Mac-based school. And Apple this last summer came out with some new additions to their iWorks apps. And one of them being adding drawings, the other adding recordings. So I was doing this with my students this fall, and what I liked about using something like Keynote, which is on the bottom, was that one, it limited the amount of text per slide, so it wasn't overwhelming for the student per slide. They could go slide to slide and visually just take in what was there, versus when they had the 2-column notes, they just saw this whole page of words and it was just overwhelming. Then we could also add in images that went with each short bit of text, so that they could add a visual that went with the words. So we're making it multisensory. And I have a student who is very, very dyslexic, but she is strong auditorily. So when we were done, because I did the notes along with them, I recorded my voice, because now that I can add recording to it. So I recorded what the notes said, and then I shared this whole thing to her. So when she was studying, she had the words in front of her. She could listen to me reading them, and then she had the visual. For those other students, they just had the visual and the words, but it was less overwhelming to study because they could go slide by slide. And again, they could add in drawings. That's something we're going to get into this after the break. But also, this can be done in things like the picture above is PowerPoint. You know, some of these tools, depending on what device you're on, have the ability to draw or have the ability to add recordings, or they're starting to add them in. And it can just be a new way to think about how can we have students organize information that is more beneficial to their learning needs and less to the traditional, this is how we've always done it. Some other just things that exist out there as for note-taking ideas, this idea of taking notes in a journal. I think about all the times I find things on Teachers Pay Teachers that are kind of this whole cool note-taking journal idea. And I'm like, wow, can we create them themselves? And there is the science journal is actually from Google. And it was a really cool idea that they had this old science journal that exists out there. And then in researching this past fall, I found somebody sharing a way to make that idea that they can make a journal in Google. And there's a link on here that, again, if you would like it, I can send you the presentation, and that you can find out how to just make, this would be in Google Slides, how to make a journal in Google Slides, which I think back to, again, how could I take this into a note-taking format? I'm doing this actually as well in a literature class. We're mapping out our story with characters and setting. I have some students in Keynote, some students in Google Slides. So how can, it's giving me thought to how can we use these tools beyond traditional ways to help students organize information. They can take their daily note on our reading in their slides, and it's a short bit, it's not overwhelming, and it's all contained in one place. Another key thing, I talked about visuals earlier. This whole idea of sketchnoting has really been coming around for a couple of years in education. It's that idea of combining words and images to take notes. I've seen it happening in the professional field. I have a good friend who works for United Healthcare, and they paid an artist to come in to their yearly meeting or something and do this. They got paid to do this. But the idea that we can do this in education as teachers and as students, and I am not artistic by any stretch of the imagination. It's taken me a while to embrace this for that reason. But I've talked with enough people to say, it's not about being artistic. It's just about how to visually represent information in different ways. And having tried it myself a couple of times, it was kind of neat to try. And it was it was interesting to go back and look. And I actually tried this a couple years ago when I had to sub in a science class. And we were studying magnets, and I had a student, we were talking about the North and South Pole of a magnet, and he drew a penguin and Santa Claus on either end of the magnet. I was like, okay, interesting. I'm not sure he was going to remember it. But come, several weeks later, the student who was struggling with the information distinctly remembered what he had drawn and why he had drawn it. And so it really made me want to embrace this. And this past fall, this book came out by Sylvia Duckworth. She has this amazing website with some resources, but this book on how we can teach students and how we can teach ourselves the Sketchnote is a really great resource to explore, or just exploring her website, which has other ones. So I encourage, in new ways that we can have students embrace it. And they talk about, particularly our learners, doodling can be really helpful for them to remember information. There have been studies that are coming out about that. So if we can combine their doodling with their note taking, how beneficial would that be for their learning? Quick things to think about, that tools that are not necessarily note-taking, but if you're familiar with Read and Write for Chrome, which we talk about with their text-to-speech, speech-to-text, word prediction, but they have this ability to collect information with highlights. So if a student's researching off a website, they can collect information, they can add in voice notes, and then also just the ability to access information. They have an OCR built in. That's a whole nother tool to explore on its own. But definitely know that there's some things in there that could add to the note-taking process. And just if you're not familiar with in Safari, whether you're on Mac OS or an iPad, they have this reader mode, which is really these lines that you can click on, and it takes away distractions and is great for a built-in reader. So if you have a student who's note-taking and needs the information that they have to take the notes from, which is online, this can be beneficial as a distraction takeaway. So we talk about executive functions, which is such a large conversation. So I'm just going to kind of quick address some areas. This is not an end-all be-all to that, but it's such a large area that we need to consider. So this I'm just going to play briefly.
Sharon, having trouble hearing you.
Okay, I'll hang on. Yeah, let me get it. Okay, I'll talk about it more briefly. So, and again, you can find this video on YouTube, and I have a link where I have it. So this mood meter, which comes out of Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, there is an app, there is a paper version, but the idea is talking with students about where they are. And so if you're having students who are struggling with their, self-regulation, with anger issues, the idea is this is a way to create a conversation with them about where they're at. And then within the app, or if you go with a paper version, you have to get some more resources. Within the app, they pick where they are, they talk about how they're feeling, and then it gives suggestions as to how to help them get to another spot. Like, okay, if you're really angry, if you're really in the red, how can you get to the green area, and what do you need to do? So it's a neat way to help students learn about self-regulation. Again, the app has a little bit more to go with it that helps talk through that, but there is this paper version you can find online that just creates the conversation. This is actually the version we use at our school. We use the paper version because students, when they go talk with their advisor, where are you at? Okay, why are you feeling that way? But it just gives the students a little empowerment to determine where they are and then talk about where they want to be. Again, this can be found easily online, and it's some really great research out of Yale that has gone on with this to do, and it's just called the mood meter. One area that's always difficult, I think, is assignment tracking for particularly our executively dysfunction kids. I kind of laugh because we still require our kids to use a paper planner. I laugh because we have kids who can't read them because they're so dysgraphic, or they can't read them because they're dyslexic, various versions. So this has been a conversation we've been having, but we're trying to create good habits, and it's been harder for teachers to track whether students use, do they check their assignments on Google Classroom. So we're finding that balance and just teaching them a skill. However, I definitely had a student who was so dysgraphic, he was in middle school, that the planner was just ridiculous. So we had to find an online solution. So this was probably the best one I have found. It's free, My Homework. It's a website. They also have an app. And the student did really well about it. Was really easy to set up, which is what I liked about it. I found some other ones that I found were a little bit more complex. and it's synced within the app and the website. His mother has a login. His teachers can go on and check, because we made sure that he had to share the login for that, or he has to show his teachers what he did. But it's the most cleanly organized one. And again, it's free and it's device agnostic, so it can be used anywhere. So if you really have students who need to write down assignments, but they're not, or they need one place, like sometimes our students, we use Google Classroom and they're overwhelmed with Google Classroom because not everything's lined up perfectly yet with how Google Classroom works or any of the other learning management systems. This is a great tool that kind of thinks about that assignment pad, that daily planner, in a digital format. Always thinking about organization and working memory. I've been working a lot with my own staff on this. Google Drive can get very overwhelming. A lot of my own staff, they have created so many documents in Google Drive. They have not organized them whatsoever. And then as I've worked with them, they're realizing they need to teach their students this, which is true. You know, making sure students make folders. They can color code those folders, so maybe that helps. And the processes for saving, for creating documents, I always tell students to go into that class folder and then create the document so it doesn't get lost. I'm not always great about this myself, but if we teach them that process of organization, it will help them in the long run. We often just think they will do it, and they don't. Similarly, if not Google Drive, things that can be done in Dropbox, which is always a solution. But just thinking about how we can help students with that organization process using these everyday tools and some of the simple things that are in them. Thinking about reminders and notes. Google Keep is a great way to, they look like Post-it notes. It's a pretty simple format for notes, and they can be organized. Just notes on if they're on an iOS device or some other note-taking app for how they can track, some students maybe just track assignments in there, or a checklist of things they need to do. Loved Evernote for a long time. I've kind of switched over to actually OneNote away from Evernote, but I do like Evernote as another organization system that's been around for a while. And then just thinking how students use a calendar. If they can track assignments on a calendar, maybe that's another way, or just a task list. I have some, staff using Google Calendar tasks just to keep them self-organized. But we have to teach these processes directly to kids. They do not know them innately, and probably many of our adults don't either. So we can all learn along with them. So we always want to think about, when you're picking these tools for organization and working memory, what is the input method? Is it typing? Is it dictation? Is it easy to use? What's the form factor? It's definitely going to work differently for different students. And really, what is the intent of the app? Evernote has gotten probably a little bit more complex, but I think some older students may benefit from it in the long run, where younger students might be something more like a Google Keep or just a Notes app. Timers are a big one. Teaching students to use timers. These are 3 ones that I really love. I use the visual timer in my classroom all the time. I used to have that I had the real visual timer, and then now I have the online one. 360 timer is a great one for kids who really struggle with time management, because it really teaches them within it. And again, I won't go full in depth, but you can explore more about, you can see the different color coding for different tools. And Pomodoro, which has been around for a really long time, which has a whole other set of things that go along with it. This Pomodoro technique about teaching them to take breaks, long-term, short-term breaks, alarms, for some students having that ticking sound, some that's distracting, but there's a really whole lot to this technique that has existed, but now has been built into an app to help students manage their time, particularly during like a homework or, long-term assignments, ideas that they have to be there for a while. And maybe they need to take breaks, but we need to manage that, so the break doesn't be the 25 minutes and the work is the 5 minutes. There's also a focus timer, which is kind of an opposite idea. It's the idea that you put the timer on the phone and you have to put the phone away. And if they pick it up, then the timer stops. So it's the idea of how long can they maintain focus on the assignments and not touch the phone, which it can be challenging, I think, for adults as well. And then the tool that somebody showed me a while ago was a flower, which is more of just kind of if a student needs just a calming moment away, this idea of this app is just that it's kind of, you follow this flower and it's just kind of soothing music, very mindful kind of activity. But if they need a break, a mind break, I think of like Go Noodle, this can be a simple tool for themselves to just give themselves a brain break. That's kind of some soothing music, but gives them kind of something to do to make this flower fly around. quickly for just the idea for executive function, we don't often think about relating to engagement, but so many times our kids can't manage assignments because of the form factor, their executive function when everything's paper-based or things like that. You know, just always think about how we can engage students a little bit differently to help them with their executive functions and think about their learning disabilities. Edpuzzle is a great tool that simply is a way to use video and you can embed questions. So I think about students who can't watch a long video, they can't sit through that and remember information because of their working memory and they just can't retain it and everything else comes into play. You can embed questions along the way. It's free. It's really neat if you haven't explored it. Game-based learning is another way to help our kids who, you know, to engage things differently because they can't always manage their executive function in a traditional review environment. Kahoot is very familiar with a lot of people. I actually am a huge fan of quizzes because it takes it to be on the student's device, not on the board. So those kids who can't manage that far point looking, if you've played Kahoot, the colors are up there, they need to remember the words, they need to look down at their device, the working memory gets in the way. Quizzes puts all the information, the question, and the answers on a student's device. And if they are dyslexic, if they're on an iPad or iOS device, the question and answers will be read to them. So just another thing to think about when we're having students engage, that we need to consider other things. Another way, just a different way that we can help kids manage something is just with Flipgrid. And if you're not familiar, it's really awesome. It's just a way to have kids share information and engage with video. And it was bought by Microsoft last summer, so it's actually free, completely for education. If you're not familiar with it, it can be used across the board. But again, sometimes with students, when they have to think about information and their executive functions get in the way of they can't remember it, and with the working memory, they have something to share, they can just dictate it in with a video. They have a great resource site for how to share information, different ways people are using it in education in so many different ways. We use it for fluency drills. I use it for science sharing. Just a really amazing tool. Nick, you need to have your wife, if she doesn't know about this. I learned a lot about speech and language, people using it in different ways. It's really great way to engage students. And again, just another thing that you can think about for different engagement is just having students use their voice and images. I'm a huge fan of Adobe Spark Video. It's also free. Last year went all their premium features free for education. Similarly, Adobe Clips, which is only on iOS, but Adobe Spark Video is device agnostic. So again, when we think about students and they have to manage information, when we can just let them use their voice and images, sometimes we can free up some of those executive function processes that they run into when they're dealing with print all the time. So here's an amazing resource because those are just a few of the things out there. Again, understood.org. On their front page, if you go down to their tech finder, there are all these areas that you can explore different tools and recommendations and reviews. I have a good friend who is one of the people that contributes to this. So it's a really great resource when you're wanting to look for other things that exist and what people might say about them. And to learn more, this YouTube channel is just one that I've curated videos from various different tools. Some of the ones you see today, again, the mood meter you can find on there. That is just a curation of videos that exist out there that you can take a look at. There's more than what I've talked about today. I always encourage people, if you want to know more, reach out to the companies. So many companies are willing to kind of give their own online demos. Connect with them on Facebook and Twitter, particularly to give feedback or to ask questions. A lot of changes I've seen are because I contact these companies, particularly with relation to our LD learners. I think that's really important. And if you definitely, if you're on Twitter, I encourage you through these 3 hashtags, ATChat, which is always active, but they run a weekly chat on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock. Some really great people that are regularly onto that. LD chat, which is more designed for parents. It's at noon on a Wednesday, but definitely a hashtag to follow, and just that hashtag of dyslexia that you can often find a lot of resources if you're on Twitter, or if you're not, you can even look up the hashtags and see what information is being shared. So that's a lot I've thrown at you. I appreciate you guys hanging in there, and hopefully some of it can be beneficial, or again, you've reinforced what you're already using. Does anybody, I know there are 2 of you, do either of you have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Yes, Mickey.
I'm a multitasker to my shame, but I was looking up some of the note-taking apps, and I could not find the Wink app.
Okay. I think it's, now that you say that, let me look. That's funny because I just found it recently.
There's several Winks, but none of them look like note-taking.
No, they didn't look like note-taking. I actually think that I found that on the understood. It's my W-H-I-N, no, that's, W-H-I-N-K, sorry. W-H-I-N-K.
Okay.
That's good to know. I go fix that.
Still not finding it.
Did you type in Wink note-taking?
Yeah.
And it's not coming up?
Note-taking. W-H-I-N-K.
Yeah.
Nope, nothing's coming up.
Huh. That's kind of odd.
Oh,
I wonder if, yeah, because that's coming. What are you looking it up on? Well, because I Googled it and it came up.
I'm searching under the App Store under the search button. When I do Wink, the only thing it gives me is Wink in Stories.
I wonder what device are you looking it up on?
iPad.
An iPad. Change it to iPhone only, I wonder.
Give me a second.
No, because if you're on an iPad, there's a spot where you can click on it and say, look up iPhone only apps, because I've had to do that for some others. I think it's in the upper left. I don't have my iPad in here.
No, it's not going on my, not on this iPad.
Send me an email and I'll send you the link to it.
That's oh wait, here we go. Sorry, I apologize.
No.
Wink and I'll send you an email.
Okay, that works.
Hey, Sharon, it's Nick. I have a question. So how do you know what works for kids? Is it really like trial and error? Like you try something with a student and it either works great or it doesn't work at all, and you're like, okay, let's go to the next thing. How does that work?
There's definitely some of that. There's various components. I mean, there's really learning the student's profile, and which we do as educators, and knowing kind of somewhat, first of all, that, okay, definitely this thing is going to require this task that the student can't do. Like if I have a student who really needs audio in something and this doesn't support audio. And then some of it is trying. And I also, particularly working with middle schoolers right now, I'm trying to expose them to several things, because what they're going to need down the road, it may be one thing one time and another thing another time. So just, I think about all the study skills we learned growing up in different ways, highlighting and organizing note cards and Post-it notes, exposing them to this exists and we're going to try it together. And then this exists and we're going to try it together. And they're going to learn along the way that this may be my go-to thing all the time. And, oh, wait, I really want to use that right now. So it's kind of a little bit of training them with all of them, or as many as make sense for the learner, and then also letting things go when they don't work.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's hard because it's hard to get the time to do that, and particularly if you're in a public school, letting educators let that happen. But I think if we do more of that, I think in the long run, it would be easier for those teachers because they're not in charge of creating that format all the time for kids. You're going to do it my way, and that's the way we're going to do it. Where if they let kids try it, they don't have to be the sage on the stage as teachers with the technology, but just trust the student to work with it to get the task done. You guys have any other questions?
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Nope, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I figured out, I found it.
Oh, good.
I had to go through something. It's not easy to find.
That's weird. Yeah, then it may not be the one. I think I found it on the Understood site, and it was just interesting to me as I was exploring this whole idea of visual notes. But again, you can do it with something like a Notability also. So
I use it all the time. For meetings, that's how I take my notes.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yes.
I'm not an educator. I'm not a teacher. I'm more from the software and the startup entrepreneur side.
Okay.
And I'm very much interested in the ed tech market, which is fairly large. You have K-12 colleges and lifelong learning and corporate and so on. I wrote a testimonial for the Connecticut Educational Technology Commission a few weeks ago. And I'd like to share that. It's on my Twitter. The link is on my Twitter, and I just followed you on Twitter. And I'll respond. I would really like your feedback. Basically, what I'm trying to do is have software startups, so programmers, developers, the entrepreneurs, work with the teachers, work with the students, work with the administrators in some kind of a processed way, because that's how good innovation is. It's got to be process oriented. I've done some research into Connecticut. I mean, Connecticut has about 70 different ed tech companies, but they're all very fragmented. So this is some kind of a very unified, but not a top-down approach. There's no, it's more networked. It is more kind of peer-to-peer thing.
Right.
And really about cooperation and collaboration. And I follow what's called the open innovation model, which is very big with MIT and the MIT School of Thought for doing innovation. I used to work at the IBM Research Lab, so the innovation process is something I'm very familiar with. I will send you the link, and I would really like your feedback, or the others too, or I could pass it to Nick, and Nick can distribute it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, because I will tell you that's probably a great model, because that's kind of what Google did with their suite for education, and it made, I have a good friend, before even Classroom came out, he was a district in Norwalk, and he was one of the people who tried it out, and they broke it, and Google had to rebuild it. But it definitely, teachers appreciate that, if you come to us, we can tell you what the kids need and what the teachers need, and it will probably create a better product. And any tool that I've used that does that, definitely I have used more long term.
Yeah, so, absolutely. I've emphasized that very strongly in my test. It's a 4-page write up, but it has about 28 footnotes, which is pretty well documented.
That's impressive.
Yeah, Sharon, SB is fantastic. I've met him a couple of times now, and I think you guys would definitely would have a lot to talk about. So SB, I'm glad you got to meet Sharon tonight and follow her on Twitter. She's definitely an expert in this space. So
that's great.
Awesome.
I would definitely be curious to chat further.
Thank you.
So any other questions for Sharon before we wrap up the webinar?
Sharon, this is Melanie Wagner, Nick's wife. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I also wanted to mention that I found recently something that works for my students that like to handwrite their notes, but also have a really hard time organizing, and they just have like the paper everywhere. Something called Rocketbooks, and I was wondering if you
I almost threw that in tonight.
Yeah. Okay.
I love Rocketbook.
Okay.
Yeah. What is to explain your success with it to people?
I just thought it was a really cool way, especially using the symbols, to kind of help the student organize their writing and like have it downloaded digitally, so they could then toss, erase the paper, and they didn't have all this paper in their, their life. So
for you guys who are not familiar, Rocketbook, it was actually started off a Kickstarter. It's a cool notebook that is, you have to use these special pens, these friction pens I think they're made by Pilot. Funnily enough, our school created all our school pens with these pens. I love them. But you can write in this notebook. It's definitely organized and designed. They've definitely evolved it since I had the original one into really great organization. But kids can write it, and then it can take the notes into a device in an image format and organize it. And then because of cost, if you're thinking about it, when they're done and have taken all those notes into their device, you can actually microwave the notebook, and it clears it, and you can use it again. So it's really fun to play with, really kind of cool. And
what I like about it is also the pen is erasable.
Yes, and it's so erasable.
It's so erasable.
It's not the old pen tech ones that we had that we claimed were erasable. I will tell you, if you use erasable pens, don't ever sign a check with them, because the whole essence of the ink is freezing a microwave. We had my CFO signed a check with one of these pens, and then somebody left the check in their car, and heat, which is why you can microwave it, made the signature disappear.
Got it.
But
That's
you can
funny.
put it then in the freezer, and it brings it back. So by the way, if you microwave the notebook and
oh my gosh,
you supposedly can stick it in the freezer, and it brings all the information back.
Okay.
But I like those pens too, just for kids who do like to handwrite, and when they make mistakes, because you know, the pencils, they break, they're constantly sharpening them. The pens do erase beautifully. So if you do have a handwriter, yeah, the friction pens, they're really amazing. And then using it with the Rocket notebook, I do agree, Melanie. It's a really great notebook.
Yeah, it is.
My head, who is dyslexic, he uses one too.
Well, Sharon, thank you so much for making time tonight and sharing all this great information. I will go ahead and edit out all of our fun small talk at the beginning, and then get this posted up to YouTube probably either tomorrow or this weekend, and I'll make sure I share it with you. We'll share it on social media.
Great.
And then anyone who didn't make anyone who wasn't able to join tonight will be able to go watch the recording. And I'll make sure to include your contact information for your website as well, so people can get in touch with you. So, yeah, I appreciate you making time. Thank you to everyone for joining.
Thank you to
everybody. You guys
everybody.
found this helpful. And Happy New Year to everyone, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, everyone.